Okay, welcome to week 3 of healthcare managerial accounting. So the agenda for this week is that you should complete quiz 1, which is posted in the quizzes folder. You have until tomorrow, Tuesday at 8 p.m. to finish quiz 1. You can open and close that as many times as you want, and you'll see when you do that it's from the materials that we've covered during weeks 1 and 2. And then I have a folder here that has some readings, videos, and a practice quiz related to activity-based costing. And so this is a very important concept for us, because what activity-based costing allows us to do is to think about how we're going to apply cost to different things. And so in the activity-based costing world, it's called cost objects. Cost object is basically anything we want to know the cost of. And so when you think about why it's important to know cost, we have to think about how management and how organizations use cost. They use cost as a basis to make a lot of key decisions. Pricing decisions, make versus buy decisions, whether a product or service is profitable or not profitable, whether to invest in something or not invest in something, and so forth. And so getting cost right is essential. And so a big part of activity-based costing is to give us the tools to get cost right. So when you click on this folder, you'll see that there are several items in the folder. The first thing you'll see is my PowerPoint slides, which give us some general overview about activity-based costing. So I want you to go through those slides, just kind of get a sense for where we are with things. So let me just open up those slides and share them with you for a minute. So I just have to just bear with me 1 second. So what these slides basically do is talk about some of the basics of activity-based costing. But before we get into that, I think you have to understand why understanding cost is essential. And so there's many decisions that are made by organizations that use cost as a basis for decision making. Pricing, profit loss, resource allocation, make versus buy, whether I should accept or reject a special order, etc. And so what we need to make sure is that we understand how to get cost right. And so when we talk about cost in the accounting world, we really talk about it in 3 dimensions: direct materials, direct labor, and then overhead or indirect cost. And this is true in healthcare operations, as it is true in manufacturing, as it's true in service, in merchandising, and so forth. And so what we know is that direct material and direct labor cost, we do a pretty good job of tracing that activity and those costs to our cost object. But when it comes to overhead and indirect cost, it's a little more challenging. And so what activity-based costing does is it helps us to put some focus on how we can determine the cost of something we want to know. That could be the cost of a cup of coffee, the cost of a pizza, the cost of an operation, the cost for a doctor to provide a service, and so forth and so on. Okay, so basically when we talk about the elements of cost, we talk about direct materials. Those are the materials we can directly trace to the cost object. So if you think about your smartphone that you carry around with you all the time, you can see the materials in that. It might be the glass, it might be the components inside, such as the microprocessor and the memory chips and so forth. And so those material costs typically are provided by the vendors that you buy those things from. And then the direct labor is how much time does it take us to actually to assemble that particular product. Okay, so if we were talking about an operation in a healthcare facility, the direct labor might be the surgeon's time, it might be the nurses who are there, the technicians, and then if there's any materials that go into the particular job. But then the big part of the problem that we've run into is, how do we assign these indirect costs, these overhead costs? And in many operations, and particularly in healthcare, these overhead costs are the lion's share of the cost. I think we mentioned last week that in many cases, the overhead cost can be 60 to 80% of the cost. And so we have to come up with a methodology on how to assign those costs. And if we don't get the cost right, then we often end up in what's called a death spiral, which means that we often misassign cost to a cost object, either overcosting or undercosting. And as a result, we make bad decisions. We underprice a product or we overprice a product, and that puts us at a competitive disadvantage. So getting cost right is really an essential to being able to properly make the right decisions. So the traditional means for assigning overhead costs was very simple. We took all of overhead costs and we put them in one bucket, and then we assigned them based on some very simple algorithm. Might be the amount of time surgeons spent on on operations. Might be, if we're in a factory setting, the amount of direct labor hours, direct labor time, or direct labor dollars. And but what we found is that distorted the assignment of these overhead costs. So there's one of the articles I have you read is something called Measure Cost Right, Make the Right Decision. So that's in the week 3 folder. And what that does is basically gives us a framework to think about how are we going to assign overhead costs to our cost objects. So we get cost right and we make better decisions. And so basically what it's going to call for us to do is to break out the elements of overhead, just like we look at direct material and direct labor, and then look at how the product or service that we're making or building consumes those overhead resources. So if I have a big engineering staff that's in my indirect cost, but it only services the new products, then I don't assign those costs to the traditional products or the older products, and so forth. Okay, so I want you to flip through these slides, and then what I'd like you to do is to go into the and look at the readings that I've assigned. So let me just flip back. Okay, so one of the most important readings of the semester is this Measure Cost Right, Make the Right Decisions. It was actually written in the late 1980s, early 1990s by Robert Kaplan and Robin Cooper. They were at that time, and actually they both still are at the Harvard Business School. And that really kicked off this whole idea about activity-based costing and the need to get cost right. And so from then, Kaplan in particular has spent most of his career trying to figure out how to get cost right. And he's most recently focused on healthcare costs. So I've put some stuff out here that I want you to read. One is called Using Activity-Based Costing to Understand Healthcare Cost. And then we're going to come back and look at some more work from Robert Kaplan. He has a proposal on how to solve the healthcare cost crisis. So I put a short reading in a video. And so I think if once you've gone through and done the readings, listened to the videos in this week 3 folder, you're going to have a much deeper appreciation for why cost is important and a better handle on how we might go about assigning costs, particularly indirect overhead costs to cost objects, and how that might help us make better decisions. And if we were to believe Robert Kaplan, it might even be a step towards helping us to solve the healthcare cost crisis. Let's hope it is, right? Because we know it is a crisis and we know there's something that we have to do about it. Okay, so as always, please feel free to email me, call me, come by my office, request a time to meet online, whatever works. We're getting into some of the meat of the course this week. This activity-based costing discussion, it really gives us a good foundation that we'll leverage throughout the rest of the semester. But so this week, you should finish up that quiz 1, which is posted up here in the quizzes folder. And week 3, go through the activity-based costing. On Wednesday, I'll post what I'm going to call a practice quiz that'll be on activity-based costing. And then next week, we're going to jump into a new topic, which is on cost, volume, profit analysis. But I'll save that for later in the week when I'll post some information about cost, volume, profit. And then we'll talk about quiz 2 later in the week and early part of next week. Okay? So thanks very much, and I hope I'll hear from each of you soon.